Welcome to the Underground, the Steel City Underground, a Pittsburgh Steelers podcast made by fans like you, for fans like you. Now, here's your host, Joe Kuzma.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Steel City Underground podcast, the movement created by fans like you, for fans like you. I am your host, Joe Kuzma, and I want to remind everyone that Steel City Underground is a proud member of the Champion Sports Network. Now, today, I love football. I think you love football too. We've always talked about how passionate we are for the Pittsburgh Steelers here on the Steel City Underground podcast. I talked to many of the fans over on Facebook, Twitter, and over on my YouTube channel too. You know, I'm gonna fly by the seat of my pants again today. I had somebody that told me the last time I did one of these where I had absolutely no agenda, I had no show notes, and I just kind of rolled with the punches. And I feel a need to roll with the punches. Let me tell you, you're going to think I'm crazy, and I feel like I'm going crazy because let me tell you a little story about yesterday. So I'm going through some of the articles that I have, and of course, you'd be crazy to think if I'm posting on social media at all times of morning, afternoon, evening, and night, and sometimes I actually am. I'm there on my phone or my iPad or my desktop computer, and I'm typing away and I'm chatting with you guys, and it's a lot of fun. Let me tell you, I really enjoy it. I enjoy this. I enjoy doing this, and I'm very grateful and very thankful for everyone's support, and I love when everyone gives me some feedback back. And, you know, I'm watching the Pens game, and boy, you're talking about something that's just a nail biter and you're pulling out your hair. And, you know, I'm seeing some of the different comments about the Penguins, and it just, the Yinzers are going to Yins, whether it's the Pens, Pirates, or Steelers, right? Am I right? But there was something in particular. I'm going through some of my old articles and I'm seeing, hey, you know what? News is kind of slow. Let's see what I could revisit and share with the Steelers community that I engage with. And always of controversy is if I bring up some names like Landry Jones and Dri Archer. And it just so happened that I did a collaboration with Eric Herman over at Steelers Grind, ever so gracious to send me a very good idea of which we collaborated on and went back and forth on whether or not those two were draft busts. Okay, so we did this article maybe a month and a half ago, and I go to revisit it, and I'm putting it out there, and there's some new groups and admins and whatnot and different people on social media that I've engaged with since this was released. So I said, you know, I'm going to put this back out here. We're gonna cast the line. We're going to put the bait out there and see if anything bites. And holy cow, let me tell you, I think the more people are interested in complaining about backup quarterbacks than they are about actual draft picks or anything, any type of other moves that the Steelers make. It's funny. We always go back. I go back and look. My entire last podcast episode was dedicated to just kind of toot my own horn and pat my own back on at least being right on some of the predictions that I made. Most of them, actually, so far. The Steelers are at least a little bit predictable in that regard. They're not the Cleveland Browns, for God's sake, who they changed their coaches and their GMs and even their ownership, and they changed their uniforms, and they're in constant change. The Steelers are at least a little bit predictable, but it's fun to go back and look and see, hey, you know, remember when we said this, you know, and they're all over. I think it was Mel Kiper, and it was on Twitter and on Facebook, and they were sharing like some of the things he said about, I think he said that Jimmy Clausen was going to be this great quarterback, and, you know, all this crazy stuff. So going into that, there are a lot of people complaining about the backup quarterback situation in Pittsburgh, and I'm like, you know, show me one situation of the other 31 NFL teams where it's better. And I know somebody's going to say, well, blah, 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 blah. Well, okay, you know, hey, Philadelphia, they have Sam Bradford, and they have, who is it? They got Carson Wentz, and they also have Chase Daniel. Well, show me Chase Daniel's record and show me what he's done in a backup capacity compared to anybody that the Steelers have had. Look at Bruce Gradkowski's record, or look at Michael Vick last year. Look at Landry Jones. Go back to Charlie Batch or Byron Leftwich. Show me a guy who's done anything. Chase Daniel is pretty much a nobody. So if you want to tell me there's 3 good quarterbacks on the Eagles, we don't know what Carson Wentz is going to do. We don't know what Jared Goff's going to do at the Rams. We know that Nick Foles has been up and down. There isn't a situation that's good anywhere. Sam Bradford wants out of Philadelphia. I don't know where he's going to go. Who the hell wants a quarterback right now, especially one that's always injured and costs $12 million? Excuse my language. I mean, I keep this clean, so this is an all-ages podcast, but every now and then I kind of lose my top. I mean, the Indianapolis Colts, they don't have Andrew Luck last year. They play with Matt Hasselbeck. What did that... I don't even know what Matt Hasselbeck can do. He's 41 years old. Good Lord. That situation is no better. You look around the division, okay, maybe Cincinnati has an okay backup, but what did he even do against the Steelers? And, oh man, the guy's name is just escaping me right now. I almost want to call him like Redhead number 2 just for the fun of it. But, you know, they lose Andy Dalton. They're okay. They're a decent team, just like the Steelers, who are able to rebound even when their main guy is down and out, okay? What are the New England Patriots going to do without Tom Brady? That's going to be fun to see this year. Let's see if they have any better of a situation than anyone else. There are teams who still can't find a starting quarterback in the NFL, let alone what they're doing with their backups. So if you can't even find the guy, how are you going to find the backup to the guy? The guy to the guy. You know what I mean? It's just such a futile effort in trying to explain this to some of the fans that are out there. And it's one of the things that popped up that really kind of like made me lose my top. I'm just, my eyes are bugging out at some of the comments. No, we need a backup quarterback. Well, who are you going to get? Brian Hoyer was a guy that I thought would be okay, but I wouldn't want to overpay him to be a backup quarterback. And even him going to the Chicago Bears and backing up Jay Cutler, you mean to tell me you would rather have that situation with Jay Cutler and Brian Hoyer as the quarterbacks as opposed to Ben Roethlisberger and any guy you could pretty much get off the street that's at least competent and could give the ball to Le'Veon Bell or D'Angelo Williams or, the greatest wide receiver in the NFL right now in Antonio Brown? Come on, it's just crazy. It drives me nuts. You look at the Cleveland Browns, they have a circus going there again with Josh McCown, and you have RG3, and I don't know, they might still have Austin Davis, and then they drafted some guy too, and it's just utter madness. You look at the Baltimore Ravens, even where they weren't doing well, Joe Flacco was still okay. Joe Flacco has won them games and won them a Super Bowl. I'll at least give credit where credit is due. But you mean to tell me that Matt Schaub, that team was any better with Matt Schaub? Okay, Matt Schaub's a veteran. So you're looking at a 500 average ball club when you're taking a nosedive with your backups. It's just the way it is. And just be thankful that we have a signal caller that is as good as he is in the top tier of the NFL and one of the all-time greats in my opinion. So just the horse with the backup quarterback thing, just get off of it. We'll revisit this again next year. And, Bruce Gradkowski's got a 1-year deal. Landry Jones will be a free agent again not again, but he will be next season. So you'll be looking at 2 guys that are going to probably go off into the pasture, and the Steelers might find another veteran that's in free agency other than Gradkowski and then draft a new guy. If they acquire a handful of draft picks, or I don't know that they're necessarily going to have any compensatory picks. I really don't see any free agents that, maybe they could maybe get one with Kelvin Beachum. I don't know. It's a little, I'm a little outside my realm there. Again, I said I had no agenda today. That's something I have to think about. It's, in the past, for those of you who aren't aware, compensatory draft pick is something that you get when you lose a free agent. So you have like a player that had a certain status on your team and you lose him to free agency, and then he does whatever with that other team, and the league rewards you for some odd reason with somewhere between a 4th and 7th round draft choice. The formula isn't something that's public. I really do think that they just put a blindfold on a guy, spin him around 3 times, and let him throw a dart at a board, and that's how we figure out who and what a draft pick's worth. The Steelers did receive let me think about this now. They extra 7th round draft pick. That's it. They did get a draft pick, a compensatory draft pick, that is, in the 7th round of this year's NFL draft for Bryce McCain having left. So you're almost like 2 years behind, or at least a year and a half cycle behind, before you figure out where all this goes. And in the past, they've gotten them for various players. I know William Gay's one of those oddball ones where the player leaves and then he ends up even coming back a year later and they still got a compensatory pick. And that happened with, I think it's Michael Johnson, the linebacker. Is he a linebacker or defensive end from the Cincinnati Bengals? That happened there too. So those are situations. The Baltimore Ravens this year, geez, they got so many compensatory picks from losing. They lost so many free agents the year before, like Torrey Smith and oh geez, I'm trying to think of like the linebacker names. Just coming up with a blank right now. But I kind of got a little bit derailed from the little bit of the purpose and a little bit of the agenda here was to just talk about Landry Jones and then talk about Dri Archer. And Dri Archer popped into my brain, of course, because he was just released by the New York Jets. And then he gets picked up by the Buffalo Bills. And the interesting part of the segment that I did with Eric, Dri Archer was a guy that was taken 10 picks before Ross Cockrell. So the Steelers were looking at a corner, and they decided to not go with that corner. They end up taking the running back from Kent State to be their kick returner and possible punt returner. Didn't work out as a punt returner. NFL changed the kick return rules. So then when they did that, he was just a undersized, fast running back that just didn't have a real role in the NFL. So now you see Dri Archer picked up off of waivers, goes to the Buffalo Bills, and it's almost as if the Steelers, it was like they swapped the decisions they made in that draft 2-3 years ago. So Dri Archer a bust? Well, you could say that probably, but for all intents and purposes, I really don't think he was drafted to be even like a slot wide receiver or a starting running back. So it's kind of unfair to say he's a bust when the rug was pulled out from under him. But I'd beat a dead horse on this, of course. Dri Archer's barely going to have a job in the NFL. He didn't even make it to training camp with the New York Jets. That just tells you the situation is not very good there. But it creates like this. I was talking about the fans that I deal with and some of the questions that I field. And I'm going to bring Archer back up here in a second because I believe the article's name is "Were Landry Jones and Dri Archer draft busts or busted draft picks?" And I'm kicking myself for making the headline of an article a question because people don't read the article and then just immediately respond. Yes, no, they suck. Swear words, cuss words in some of these areas, and it's just wow. People get so angry over a draft pick that didn't work out. It's like, hey, it's not the end of the world. It didn't really hurt this team. Could they have found somebody else in that round that might have done better? Yes, no. In hindsight's 2020, as they say, because there are other people who are taken in the 3rd round of that draft that ended up being pretty solid NFL players right now. But it doesn't necessarily mean that the Steelers were looking at that player and position and seeing if they would fit in their system and would they have the equal result and the equal opportunity had that player been taken by the Steelers. It doesn't always work out that way. And one of those I could think of, too, was Mike Vrabel was someone who was drafted by the Steelers, the linebacker out of Ohio State. He ends up leaving Pittsburgh, goes to New England, and has a very solid career. He's now a coach over with Bill O'Brien in the Houston Texans. And that's one of those things where the opportunity didn't seem to be the same. Look at Ross Cockrell himself. He gets cut from the Buffalo Bills last year, right at the end of end of the preseason, right before the regular season. 53-man roster cuts. You got to trim the roster down and have only 53 players. The Buffalo Bills say, Ross Cockrell, you're not one of those 53. Steelers pick up on that, grab him off of waivers, make a spot by waiving another player. And here's Ross Cockrell, and he's even kind of a part-time starter there as a cornerback and in contention to be a starter this year. So it's all about that opportunity. And the sad thing is a lot of people are probably wondering, like, I mentioned this very many times. My mother, and we just had Mother's Day, and a happy Mother's Day, belated happy Mother's Day to all the mothers out there if you're listening. And I hope you enjoyed your day. My mother was never much of a football fan. In fact, to this day, she goes to the local college games, and she doesn't actually go to the game. She just goes to tailgate and to listen to the marching band, okay? So my uncle is huge, her brother, huge Cleveland Browns fan. My wife, a Cleveland Browns fan. How do I end up a Pittsburgh Steelers fan out of all this? For those of you not aware, just to rewind, yes, I am married to a Cleveland Browns fan. It can be painful. This is a house divided. I do live in Northeast Ohio, so I'm in an area where it's very much split between Browns and Steelers fans, and it tends to lean Steelers right now because the Browns, just face it, haven't been very good recently, right? So I wonder how people could be like a Steelers fan. And I had this aunt of mine who the most she could probably tell you about the Steelers is during the 70s, they won 4 Super Bowls. When she was a younger lady, before I was even thought of, she could tell you about maybe Franco Harris or Terry Bradshaw. And of course, her father was a Pittsburgh Steelers fan as well. Knew all about the Steel Curtain, and just some of that kind of like trickled down to her, and that's about where through osmosis and through some divine gift from God, I was raised to not follow that mistake on the lake. I was pulled out of a desperate situation there, and actually the Browns weren't half bad. Like, you know, through the 80s, of course, they were solid. And they lost to those John Elway teams. And then in the 90s, right before they disappeared in you know, Baltimore, they moved all the trucks over cross country there. And then they end up coming back, and they've been mediocre ever since. So the whole point to this is that some of the questions, and like I said, I didn't have an agenda, but I do have a story. So some of the questions I field for were Landry Jones and Dri Archer busted draft picks. And I'm just like, they're not even reading the article. No, they're not bad. They just need some more time to develop. Or, yeah, Landry's a busted pick. I don't know anything about the other kid. We don't even know that Dri Archer he's 2 teams removed from the Pittsburgh Steelers now. And we don't even know that. And we're responding to some of this stuff. So it's dangerous to sometimes read headlines and take it for what it's worth. And that's kind of my last point I think I want to make on this is, I think a few people are starting to think they're making a link between we only had 2 draft picks for offense this year. Okay. We had the lineman that come out of LSU. I think he's going to end up being a fine player. It's going to take him a few years. It takes a lot of players a lot of time to end up being something in the league. And a lot of people rag on Jarvis Jones for that. And this isn't going to be a Jarvis Jones discussion. I want to actually point this in the direction of Demarcus Ayers. Okay, Demarcus Ayers, smaller wide receiver. A lot of people feel that he's going to be a special teams pick. He's there to be a kick returner, there to be a punt returner. Could he be the next Dri Archer? Of course he could. But you know what? Dri Archer was a 3rd-round draft choice. He goes on the 2nd day of the draft, not the 3rd day, not several picks from being Mr. Irrelevant. He's smack dab in the middle of the conversation right there. Okay, so what was it? Devontae Freeman was a 3rd or 4th round draft pick, and look what he did last year. So, in fact, Devontae Freeman may have went, I'm trying to think, that could have been around the Landry Jones pick. There's 2 different years there with the drafts, but just to get an idea of value, if Demarcus Ayers doesn't work out for this team, they lose absolutely nothing. It's a 7th round draft choice. You're at this point, even the Mel Kipers who make some of their ridiculous statements that they do, they might not even know who some of these guys are, but the scouts certainly do. And the Steelers felt that they needed to invest in a special teams pick, and I think that they're correct in doing so. It's not to say that Ayers couldn't come out. Look at Antonio Brown, 6th round pick, right? Look how great. You never know what's going to happen. You don't have that crystal ball that tells you for certain what's going to happen in the future. But what you're trying to do is ensure your team against a situation like last year where you have Marcus Wheaton fielding punts and fumbling them in a playoff game. Because Antonio Brown got his world rocked by a dirty hit and couldn't pass the concussion protocol in time to play against the Denver Broncos. And man, if anyone could think, wouldn't it be great if you had somebody that could step up and at least, Sammy Coates stepped up. Guy's definitely next man up. You're never going to replace a great player like Antonio Brown when they go and sit. But you know what you need to do? You at least need insurance. An insurance policy. And I think the Steelers have found that they've had some weaknesses. I also think they go against the grain a little bit too. You saw how many times Dri Archer, and then they tried to do it with Jacoby Jones too, and that was just a miserable failed experiment. In fact, Jacoby Jones was far worse than Dri Archer, and if anything, I think they would have much rather had Dri Archer back there than Jacoby Jones, seeing now, the hindsight 2020 is how that turned out. So Demarcus Ayers being such a late round draft pick, if he works out, great. If he doesn't, so what? You just go on to the next guy the next year. There's a lot of wide receivers in this league. You still have somebody like Shaquem Phillips who had a decent preseason last year and couldn't stick with a roster. You know, he's a practice squad guy here or there, and the Steelers saw enough in him to at least sign him early on in this season. I don't think that was the futures contract. I can't remember, but he's part of this 90-man roster right now, and you just never know. And there's the other kid, I think, is Eli Rogers, that they're also talking about, another wide receiver that could be a return type guy. Regardless, these are the type of players that make or break a football team. You have a third phase of football, special teams, and many people don't think about that a lot of times. And really what happened with Dri Archer is a matter of circumstance where the NFL is trying to limit those type of concussion and gruesome injuries that happen on a kickoff. They're constantly moving the ball so these kickers can just kick it out of the back of the end zone. And he's really going to be a non-factor as far as a kick returner. I'll tell you that right now, even if he does make the 53-man roster. You just never know, though, if another wide receiver gets hurt and he gets some reps in some regular season games. You just never know where that might go in 2 or 3 years. He could end up being a solid contributor to his team even if he only catches 30 or 40 balls. But where he may make the greatest impact is if Antonio Brown, and people are always saying too, this is the other pet peeve of mine, why is Antonio Brown still returning punts? Well, Tim Brown did it his entire career in Oakland. He's a Hall of Famer. You know, some guys are just good at what they do, and returning punts is actually different than returning kickoffs. They're two different type of situations when it comes to where you're at on the field of play and how everyone's lined up, et cetera, okay? So while I'm saying that Demarcus Ayers may not be effective as a kick returner, more or less because of the rules and the way the NFL is played today, you never know if he's somebody that could potentially fill in or be the replacement for Antonio Brown. So maybe Antonio Brown doesn't end up with an injured knee off of special teams play. But I still don't think Antonio Brown's going anywhere. But at the very least, the Steelers will have a backup in place if something were to happen. Ladies and gentlemen, it's been another great show. I hope you enjoyed the No Agenda. As always, tell your friends, refer your friends, and if you get a chance, go over to steelcityunderground.com, check out the website. I'm not just a talking head. There are some articles over there. We got some other good content. You could always check out the archives for other podcasts. And, of course, go buy yourself a gnome t-shirt. Don't you want a Steelers-inspired gnome t-shirt? I know you do. Until next time, everyone, take care and go Steelers.
We would like to thank you for listening and remind our listeners to follow us on social media and our website, www.steelcityunderground.com.